guys, Ash here, Watcher of Realms. Welcome to the video. Glad to have you all here with me today. Hey, you know what, guys? It's been 251 days I've been playing Watcher of Realms now. I've been covering it, I should say, for about 8 months as well on YouTube. So I thought it'd be a great time to kind of revisit the game. We did in the very early days of the channel, I want to say maybe the first month, a raid versus Watcher of Realms kind of comparison video. And now I've obviously had a lot more time to kind of digest and experience the pros and the cons of Watcher of Realms compared to Raid Shadow Legends. Now, fundamentally, pretty much all of these things are just my opinion, although some are pretty leaning heavy in one side or the other. But these games, it is important to remember and say out the gate here, they're so fundamentally different when it comes to the actual gameplay style. The tower defense versus kind of the three waves, 2 waves against champions and 1 against a boss in Raid Shadow Legends. But the infrastructure, the back end of the games, there's a lot of similarities, and there's quite a lot that Raid does better and that Watcher of Realms does better as well. Let's start with the pros. What does Watcher of Realms do better than Raid Shadow Legends? First and foremost, I was actually watching a video, kind of a nice recap video as well by Mad Camper on Watcher of Realms, and he touched on this, and boy is it absolutely fact, and it's the events. Man, Plarium can learn a ton out of the event calendar in Watcher of Realms. It's not rocket science. It's all the events that are coming up for the following week, exactly when they start, exactly what the rewards are going to be, and that's it. It's super simple, super transparent, and Matt Capra mentioned it in his video as well, and it's so true, man. Raid does the most bizarre thing where they basically rely on content creators less than 24 hours in advance to share upcoming events and tournaments. What sense does that make? Why not just have a calendar? First of all, only about what, 5, 10, maybe 15% of your player base actually consumes content on a daily basis on YouTube. I'm obviously biased in favor of YouTubers, like it helps us to share that information. But in terms of the average player, even me as a player in the game, I like being able to go and just take a look at what's coming up in the events, right? So they do it really well, super basic, super intuitive, but you would know exactly what's going on, what's to gain, and when it's going on. The Guild Wars, right? Some people hate Guild Wars, some people like Guild Wars. I frankly really do enjoy Guild Wars. Now listen, I think there's a lot of room for improvement in Guild Wars inside Watcher of Realms. It's not super in-depth in terms of the strategy, but they're actually making a lot of improvements very recently as well on this massive update that just dropped or is going to be dropping by the time this recording goes live. But it's getting a lot better. You can see they want to take this in a lot of, more, I guess, strategically deep areas in the future, which is awesome. Demon Soldiers, I still personally think, I mentioned this before too, most of you guys tended to agree when I made this comment previously, but some of you guys actually pushed back a little bit and like, nah, Ash, man, they're fine. It's fine the way it is. But I think they're a little bit difficult to upgrade, I don't know. Maybe it's just the psychological thing of, I'm at level 2, level 1 on my 3 legendaries, level 2, level 3. If they scaled up to like level 60, maybe I'd feel like I'm making more progress just psychologically, right? But the fact that it's so difficult to level these up, it's all RNG based for the most part outside the shop, which is few and far between in terms of the good ones, and there's RNG involved in who they're gonna throw at you. But hey, anyway, some cons to be mentioned on Guild Wars, but overall, it's a place that you can kind of compete with your guild directly against other guilds. Moreover, the coolest thing about it is you get to experience the game as the enemy's point of view, which I think is really unique, and it adds an awesome dynamic to the game that otherwise you just can't experience. Number 3 is an obvious one. We pretty much mentioned this from day one. Dwarven Association, aka the Black Market. It's a billion times better than Raid Shadow Legends. It's weird, we had a chat with Raid Shadow Legends developers, a bunch of us content creators. We mentioned the shop. We're like, why does it suck so bad? It seemed like they were happy with the way it was. Like the shop, the market in Raid is not gonna be a big focus for us. It just sounded like that, right, to me. Hopefully that changes. A few things did change. They said they weren't gonna do epic empowerment, and they did that. Anyway, I digress. The market is so much better. It's so much more useful. They give you all kinds of good stuff. It's pretty affordable refreshes. You know, I'm still burning like 1,000 gold, which is basically nothing in this game, just to refresh, right? And you can get good stuff like auto fights and insignias and yada, yada, yada. So the guild shop, everything is great for the most part, maybe with one exception. We'll get to that later. But the market is great. The new thing they just added to the game at the time of this recording, which I absolutely love. I love, and it's crazy. It's just like, why wasn't this there all the time? But it's the play test. It's the play test. You don't know what you got till it's not there, I guess, or till it's there. I don't know. But now we have the ability to go in for no cost and play test our teams. You don't have to spend your runes, your keys, whatever. You can just go in there and kind of theory craft and try to optimize your team, learn from your mistakes, and try to perfect your, your optimal run. I absolutely love the play testing with nothing on the line. It helps you get better at the game, honestly, without having to go through a massive cost or expense in doing so. The next thing is the diversity of gameplay. One of my favorite things about Watcher of Realms is there's a freaking ton to do. As a matter of fact, I honestly think there might be too much to do unless you're a super hardcore grinder of the game. I'm interested to see where you guys land in that kind of spectrum as well. There's Immortal Codex. I haven't even done it yet, this rotation. There's Immortal Codex with unique bosses. There's faction trials for every single faction in the game. There's gear raids, the traditional gear raids, and now there's new gear dungeons. So 5 entirely different, completely different mechanics, bosses, styles of all those gear dungeons. There's resource raids, they're intuitive. There's guild boss. There's the aforementioned guild wars where you can play as the opponent. There's promotion raids. There's artifact material raids. Again, different dynamics, different strategy, different type of heroes that you're going to be utilizing. There's the Tide, totally different than anything else inside the game as well. Void Rift, an entire dynamic kind of exploration piece of content in the game. There's so much campaign with more difficulties always being added. There's arena, PvP, a robust PvP that rotates so that you have utility on all sorts of different types of heroes. Right now we're on, for example, single target DPS, but there's AoE DPS and anti-air, and it just cycles for each kind of arena season. It just adds up, right? There's a ton to do in a game that is about a year old. That's awesome. All right, it's time for the cons. Those are some of my favorite things in Watcher of Realms. The gear management system. The first thing that jumps out at you playing this game, honestly, is that there's free gear removal. And it's awesome. There's no ifs, ands, or doubts about it. It's probably the best thing about Watcher of Realms compared to Raid. But it adds in a very, very dire necessity for an incredibly robust gear management system that this game does not have, right? Especially this left side gear pieces. It's tough to weed out bad pieces and good pieces, right? And Madcapper also mentioned this in his video as well, but they do have, they introduced this new kind of mechanic, right? Where you go to the sell section and they give you a little thumbs up, which is nice. It kind of, in theory, you should go to a thumbs down piece and be like, oh, this sucks. But it doesn't suck. I don't know what parameters they're using for the thumbs up, thumbs down, yada, 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 but it's not very accurate, right? So it's not as easy as going, okay, I'm just gonna sell all my non-thumbs up pieces, and it's not as easy as saying I'm gonna keep all my thumbs up pieces. And sorting wise, sure, you can absolutely sort by your main attribute, attack, bonus, crit damage. All the sorting is there to give credit where credit is due in this game. You can go and say, okay, I don't want these pieces. Yada, yada, yada. However, again, the left side, the stats, the primary stats are going to be the same. It becomes a lot more difficult to A, kind of weed out bad gear and make room, right? And B, with the free swapping in this game, it's very hard to keep track of where your gear is, right? It's very hard unless you're going through the arduous process of writing things down or keeping a notebook or whatever it is, right? Using the notes in your phone. I've heard all kinds of strategies that you guys use, but the quick exchange is awesome. I can swap gear from Silas to Hex, for example, with one click of the button, but then keeping track of all this gear, again, is difficult. I would really prefer there was specific builds. You could maybe have 1 or 2 builds per hero with different gear on them, but you can't use the same kind of gear. Maybe now that I'm saying that, it's just like, yeah, but then it doesn't fix the issue though, having different builds per, but I'm sure it would make things a little bit easier. It's just hard to keep track of gear, and you end up with, you know, for example, Arrogance right here, right? I mean, he's just chilling there, and I didn't even realize he doesn't have a ring on right now, right? It can be hard to track and kind of remember builds. Maybe you could just have builds, the gear won't be on them, but you can automatically go back to that gear. I think that's the point I was trying to make, right? Whereas in Raid, the worst thing about Raid, the fact that it costs a lot of silver, sometimes millions, to move artifacts or gear around on your champions, on your heroes, it sucks. It's awful. But the good thing about it is you don't do as much moving around because of that cost, right? So in a weird way, I don't know, Raid does it better in some ways. Basically, Watcher does it better in almost every way, except for just tracking and keeping track of everything, right? I think that's the biggest thing that I would change. Again, different builds per hero, I think, would go a long way in fixing that. All the shops are awesome in this game, right? Except for the Awakening shop. Now, I think they did make changes to this a while back, but in terms of these, right, the epic Awakening tokens, which everybody even playing this game for a amount of time, you're gonna start loading up on these, right? There's almost nothing to use them on, right? A rare hero. Rares in this game aren't very good. You know, there's a couple maybe exceptions, but it's not like Raid where there's a lot of like rare only content, even for the end game, and rares are actually serviceable, dozens of them for progression. This game's not the same. It's mainly epic and legendary oriented, and they're a little bit easier to get as well, and they give you better free options than Raid does, arguably. But you just get to a point where, you know, I have 54,000 of these tokens and nothing to use it on, you know, nothing to use it on. Whereas the legendaries, you have to sacrifice legendaries to get these legendary tokens, and this stuff is insanely good stuff to use, right? So what they need is, you know, artifact essence, even if they bump up the cost to be very significant. We're talking like, you know, 1, 2, 3, 5,000 epic awakening tokens. It doesn't matter if the cost is very high, but give us more things to use these awakening tokens on, right? The awakening shop right now, even demon soldiers, allow us to buy demon soldiers so we can farm them, as I complained about earlier in the game. So I'm just not happy with the awakening shop, mainly because of the cost being super high on the legendaries and just nothing really available on the epics, right? It's a little out of whack. All right, this one really bothers me a lot, right? And I don't know if it bothers you guys as well. I don't know if you have the same problem as I do, but it's the auto save. So in a game like this, right, we have the auto fight ability. We have power of dominance. So essentially, it's going to give you a big stat boost of 30% once you basically 3-star a level for the first time. So that way, when you auto farm it, you're always basically guaranteed to beat it, essentially, right? One of the reasons this game is so cool is because it is, you know, a lot of strategy involved in placement and tiles, in the rotation of heroes during the battle, all the things that make it cool. Also, they can screw up runs, right? Even with the power of dominance. And I think I'm gonna clear this run, everything's gonna be fine. But the problem is sometimes you'll clear a stage, but you had such precise timing or placement, you know, that even with the copying the run, you fail, right? So I think that I don't know if they need to improve the power of dominance. I don't know, or just improve the way that they can save these runs. It's especially acute in the arena, right? Because what happens in the arena, if you just save exactly what you're doing on your run, it's always gonna change based on what your opponent is doing. You know, if they win a certain round in the arena, it's gonna change the order or timing of your ultimates, right, on your team. And it's gonna screw up your entire run. So there's really no easy auto battling in the arena, which really stinks. Everywhere else in the game, you know, you can go in there and try to optimize the run and try to fix those problems. But even in Guild Boss, it's just that level of consistency is not guaranteed to be there when you're trying to save and replicate the exact same run that you did. It worked out here on this particular run on Gear Raid 3. However, I think maybe it was Gear Raid 2. I went in there, I did the whole entire thing. I'm not going to show you guys again. And then the input that I saved, the timing just was off a little bit, and I have to go and redo the whole thing. You know, so that's one thing that I wish they would work on, especially again for the arena, where there's just no easy way to do that, right? Because it's so much predicated on what your opponent is doing. The last note that I have here, and this is probably the biggest one that a lot of people would probably argue, this is a really good thing, right? And I shouldn't put this on the cons category of raid versus watchers. Whether it's a pro or a con, I think it bears mentioning, right? To anybody, especially playing Watcher of Realms for the first time. Raid Shadow Legends, to me, of course, both games to a certain extent are gear intensive and champion or hero intensive as well, right? But Watcher of Realms skews, in my opinion, way in favor of the gear that you have, right? And gear can be very tough. Good gear can be very tough to get in this game. You could farm for 5 hours for one piece of good gear or 0 pieces of very good gear in the end game of Watcher of Realms. Whereas Raid tends to be a bit more champion dependent, right? You have the right type of champions. You know, you have an AoE provoker, you have an AoE provoker, right? The gear is obviously gonna matter, but in Watcher, it really matters. Now, luckily, there's free gear swaps, but what this game inevitably comes down to is you're only as good as your best sets of gear, right? And then you basically mule that gear around, because it's free swaps, to all of the heroes that you're working on any given team or dungeon that you're working on. So is that a pro or is that a con for Watcher of Realms? Maybe it's a pro, right? Because you get one good set and then you can just switch it for free and then focus there. Again, it's hard to keep track of, but it's definitely, for me, it's striking how much the gear matters in this game, whereas the champions a lot matter in Raid. One final thing on gear too is I've noticed, now granted I'm a dirty pay to win, so I've spent money in the game, but it can take a while for players to get to the point where they're able to clear and farm stage 19, 20, 21, like in gear raids. And that is when you have access to really, really good gear, right? But before that, there can be this awkward, in my opinion at least, this awkward plateau that can take you a long time, a kind of a lull in the game to bust through before you're able to actually farm up the gear that you need to clear higher level stages. So in terms of a new player experience, I do think there's a little bit too long of a gap before you have access to good gear, where in Raid, it's just not the case, right? Gear actually progressively gets better quite a bit as you naturally progress. It's not one big plateau that takes a long time to get through, you know? The last thing that I will say that I forgot on the good of Watcher of Realms, and this is really good, not only do they have epic empowerment in this game, so to speak, it's called Epic Awakening in Raid, they give extra abilities as well. So when you pull a dupe epic, not only do you get the extra, you know, in Raid you just get some extra stats. You get the extra stats here as well, right? On A2 you get 1200 HP, but you get extra abilities. Skill cost minus 100. You get, you know, rage restoration, for example. You get really crucial, important, and super powerful modifiers that stack on to what they're already doing, right? So an epic empowerment in this game, and legendary for that matter too, but epic empowerment in this game, it means a lot more than getting a simple stat boost. So pulling duplicates in Watcher of Realms is something generally to be very, very excited about. Whereas in Raid, you don't get super excited about it. You kind of want that new shiny legendary or whatever. Whereas in Watcher, getting a dupe legendary is actually pretty dang good, you know, because you're able to empower them to do really awesome things in addition to what they're normally able to do. For example, increase the ultimate attack range, right? You can reduce the cost of a hero in this game. So I think they have a much more in-depth, thoughtful, strategically important awakening system or empowerment system versus Raid Shadow Legends, which they're getting there. That is added epic empowerment, but they still have a long way to go, to me, to really get to the level of interest, I would say, or excitement that you get a dupe in Watcher of Realms. There's just some of the pros and cons that I've experienced in the game after 250 days. What about you guys, especially if you play both games? What do you agree with me on? What do you disagree with me on? Everything, like I said at the beginning of the video, is kind of just a subjective opinion, right? But I would love to hear from you guys and see what your thoughts are, especially if you've been playing Watcher for a little bit of time now. Thank you for watching, and as always, take care, guys.